Hello! In this video, I'd like to go over how I think you should organize your experiment if you are doing antibody titrations. Now, the way I tend to do my titration experiments is I bring single-stained tubes, unlike a typical flow experiment where I have multiple colors in the same tube. So that would mean if I'm doing multiple titrations in one day, I might have 4 tubes that are single stained for PE, 4 tubes that are single stained for FITSI, and 4 tubes that are single stained for APC. That means if I want to use the typical setup, so if we go to the Acquisition tab, then I would normally click on New Experiment, and I would go through the whole process to set up a new experiment, and I would have to do it just for PE, and then run the PE tubes, and then when I wanted to do a different color, I would have to go back to New Experiment and create another experiment with just FITSI and run those tubes, and that would become kind of tedious. So what I recommend doing instead is using the Extra Tools menu to do your unmixing. And that is going to be the quickest way so that you don't have to go through the entire new experiment setup every time you want to unmix just a single color. So that means when we're in the Acquisition tab, instead of running my samples under a new experiment, I recommend utilizing the default experiment. So if you click on default, you'll see it will, instead of taking us through the wizard, it's just going to take us directly to a point where we can run tubes. So you can add additional tubes here and rename them as needed, or if you would like to go into the edit window or modify your experiment, you can see that the default experiment includes these 3 fluorophores. This doesn't matter because we're not going to use this experiment to unmix, so you can just leave these as is, but if you wanted to add different groups or tubes using the Groups tab or modify your acquisition settings in this tab, you can do that. So I would set up all of your tubes for your entire experiment. So all of my PE titrations, my FITSI titrations, my APC titrations, etc. I can just have all of those labeled here. And as usual, always check the user settings, quick reminder, so under instrument control. Now this is a computer that is not actually attached to Aurora, so I can't change the user settings, but just double check that those are on the Cytek assay settings, unless you want them to be on something else. And then obviously you're going to change your forward and side scatter as you normally would for a typical experiment. Side note, when you use the Extra Tools menu, as you will see, it's not as fully featured as this Unmix experiment. So I would recommend running your side scatter in, if you go to Properties, switching that to linear, because you won't be able to switch it to log in the Extra Tools panel. So it's okay if you run it in log, but you will find that using the Extra Tools menu, all of your data is going to be squished to the bottom. So I would recommend running your tubes with the side scatter in linear. So once we have everything all recorded, instead of clicking this Unmix Experiment button, we're not going to use that. Instead, we're going to switch over to the Extra Tools menu, and you're going to have to import in your files. So first, you're going to click the Import button, and I have some example files here. You're just going to bring in one color at a time. So you're going to need your unstained tube and then whatever titrations you have just for one single color. So I have 4 tubes for AF532 plus my unstained tube. I'm going to import all of those in, and it's going to show me a explanation of what to do. So for each sample I have 3 options. They can either be single stained controls, unstained, or sample. So I have to tell the software which one of those 3 it is. And then for my single stained tubes, I have to tell the software which fluorescent tag I'm using. So your unstained tube is obviously going to be labeled as unstained. And then now we have 4 single stained tubes. So how I would recommend arranging that is you take your highest concentration, which for me is this one. I'm going to label that one as my single stain. And all the lower concentrations, I'm going to label those ones as samples. Then I have to select the fluorophore that I'm using for this color. So this particular one is AF532. Whoops. And if I want to add a label to it, I can. or you can skip it if you want to. We do have the universal negative option here if you want to utilize that feature. That's available. But once you have everything set up, then you just click Show Plots. And you'll have another window that tells you to set the 3 gates on your single stain control. So this is the same as the acquisition tab unmixing, but again, it's not as fully featured. So you're going to set the P1 gate. You can hold down the control button and move all of the gates at the same time. You're going to set it on your unstained and then your single stained. For this one, we also have our positive and negative gates. We can change the detector over here if you want to. If it happens to be on the wrong detector. And you'll notice that we don't have any additional features here, so I cannot choose if I want my side scatter to be in linear or log. I only have the option to be in linear. So again, if you have files where your side scatter is in log, then everything is just going to be all along the axis, and you're going to have to put your gate in kind of a weird position, probably something like that, just to get all of your cells, which is not totally the end of the world, but not ideal. And you don't have the option for autofluorescence extraction in this menu either. But for basic purposes, it is useful. So once we're happy with our gates, then we just go up to the top, click Unmix, and then tell the software where we want to unmix the files. So if you're on the actual Aurora computers, you probably want to direct the software to the server location, so your files end up on the server. Then we're going to click OK, and it's going to tell us that our unmixing is completed. And so when we finish that color, if I have another color that I want to unmix, then I'll just repeat the entire process. And that is how I would recommend utilizing the spectral unmixing feature underneath the Extra Tools menu to unmix your titration experiments.